In this chapter, we will build a form which uses AJAX to send its data to a remote server asynchronously. The form that we're going to create is going to submit the length, width, and height to the server, and then get back the total volume as a response. Now, I'm very well aware that we could just use plain old client-side JavaScript to perform this task. After all, it's just math. We're multiply length times width times height, and JavaScript is perfectly capable of doing that without using AJAX to send a request to a remote server. But what I wanted to do was create a really simple form that can serve as a stand-in for any kind of form that might submit its request asynchronously. For example, you might create a user login form that submits the username and the password in order to log in a user. Or you might have a contact us or a feedback form where we just want to pop up a feedback form in an overlay and allow the user to type in their feedback and hit submit and have it submit asynchronously without ever leaving the page that they were on. Or you might want to have a poll or a survey that either pops up in a window or shows on the side of a page. This is also the way that Facebook posts work when you post something to Facebook or when you use Twitter to tweet. These are all asynchronously submitted forms. You can also use it for a dictionary or phrase translator. That's a more complex operation that plain old JavaScript on the client side probably isn't capable of. But a server would have more complex software, a larger dictionary or library of phrases, and could give you a result. It also could be used for uploading files or for performing in-place content editing. That is, we click on a bit of content and we get an editing form right there so that we can edit the content without ever leaving the page that we're on. So throughout this example, keep that in mind. While our example is very simple, it's a stand-in for more complex kinds of forms that you might want to create. And it'll still give us the opportunity to examine some important features. As a starting point, I've already got some files in my sites directory in the folder ajax_form. These are in the exercise files if you have access to those. If not, you can certainly create them so that you can work along with me. It's very similar to the work that we've been doing in the past chapters. Let's look at index.php first. It's a basic HTML page. You can see that it has a form here. Everything from form to form is the form. Above it is some text that says enter measurements below to determine the total volume. The form has an ID of measurement form. Its action is going to be process_measurements.php, and the method is post. This is what a normal HTML form would look like. It has the form tag, it has action, and it has a method, which is going to be post. Then we've got several form fields. These are inputs of type text. That's a text input field. We've got one for length, one for width, and one for height, and each one of those is labeled out here to the side. And then I've got two submit buttons, and I wanted to have two of them partly so you could see the difference between them. The first one is what a basic HTML submit button would look like, and its type is submit. Now I've got an AJAX submit button right below it. Notice that its type is not submit. It's always better not to do it as a submit button when you're using AJAX. You want to just use a plain old button. A submit button has a few extra behaviors built into it that we're not going to want. And then you can see I've got a section down here with ID of result. It says the total volume is, and then in span tags, I've got a place for the volume. And I've given it an ID just to make it easy for me to target it with my JavaScript and put a value right inside of here. Notice also that result is not visible from the start. It's set as display none. So I'll have to make it visible when I finally have a result. Now if we look at the JavaScript code, this is all the kinds of things that we've seen before. Let's jump down first of all to our calculate measurements code. The calculate measurements code is going to call clear result, so we clear any previous results that we had. If we go up here and we look at that, it just simply takes that volume, which we've already figured out the element that is, get element by ID volume. It takes that volume and sets its inner HTML to be nothing, and it tells the result div that it should hide itself again. Now, when we actually have results, we're going to post those results in that same volume inner HTML, and we're going to say that the result should be display block, and that will make it visible. So I've got two functions that just make that easy, post result and clear result. I like to write things in functions like this so that it keeps this code a lot leaner. Next, you can see inside calculate measurements that I'm finding the form. I'm finding it by its ID, measurement form. So here it is, form. Now, I'm going to need to determine the form action. The action is what I want to submit to right here. Now, I certainly could just retype it. I could go up here and I could copy this process measurements.php and I could plug that down into my AJAX. there's actually a little nicer way that we can do it. We can type var action equals, we can say the form to get attribute of action, just like that. So now whatever the forms action was is what JavaScript is going to know is the action, and we can use it in our Ajax as well. That's nice. So if I make a change up here to this, and suddenly it's called send measurements, now it changes in my Ajax as well, right? They're linked together. So that's nice. All right, let's drop back down here. Look at the rest of it. Remember, if we're using a post request, which we want to do because we're going to be submitting data, then in that case, we want to be sure that we set the request header for the content type to be application/x-www-form-URL encoded. Always do that whenever you're using post and you're submitting form data. I'm also setting another request header to let it know that it is an Ajax request. And then I've got my onReadyState change function that we've seen a couple of times now. So when the ready state is ready, then we'll take the response text and I'm going to post that result. Whatever I get back, I'm going to call post result, which you'll remember just drops it right into the page and makes the result visible. Now notice here that I've also got send form data. We'll come back and talk about that a little later. So just remember that we need to also gather the form data. We determine the form action. I could take that line out, but we're going to have to come back and gather our form data. And then last of all, you can see that I've got get element by ID on that Ajax submit button, and I've told it when it's clicked that it should call the calculate measurements function. So all that should be pretty familiar to you. Let's take a quick look at processmeasurements.php. It's a very simple page. We have a function to see if it's an Ajax request or not, and then I'm just simply getting those values that have been sent in as post variables for length, for width, and for height, and I'm making sure that those are integers, not strings. I'm typecasting them as being integers, and then I multiply them together to get the volume, and then if it's an Ajax request, then I just echo back volume. If it's not an Ajax request, then we'll just exit the script. Okay, so now that we have the basics in place, in the next movie, let's talk about how we go about gathering our form data.